encouraged our entire team to think about how this changes your job. We have software engineers who are already using the generative AIs. We have folks who are writing. Now, there's always a human in the loop, but it's increasing their productivity. And but it just allows everyone to become an architect, right?
Hello. I feel like a lot of you are seeing me at like a discrete interval. So it's like, I kind of like upload like one video every month, and I feel like there's a lot that happens between those months. I'm going to try and give context to this so that you understand why this is such a big deal to me. And I think I'm going to do that by answering the question, why do I care about education? I think education is our life's exponent. What do I mean by that? Let's start with a very quick visualization. Look at the beautiful cherry blossoms outside. Okay. For another headache. This is what education does for me. So in that equation, you have x to the power n. The way I think about it is that like when you are educating yourself, when you're learning, when you're growing, when you're chasing your curiosities, when you're finding something at the bottom of the internet rabbit hole, you landed up at 2 a.m. and you decide to pursue it, and a week later you've created a project that's given you something new in your life, you're effectively changing the exponent of your life. Most things in our life, in my opinion, are changing the base, which basically means if you have a base of 5, let me demonstrate, and let's say your power is 2, right? I think a lot of experiences in life can get you here. Let's say you square it. So 5 squared is 25, and 6 squared is 36. That's not much of a difference. But now, let's say you learn and you grow when you go to college, or you read a lot, you take online courses. I think what you're doing is changing your exponent, going from 25 to 125. That growth is what I think a good education could do for you. But that's why when I think about what I want to do with my 4 years at Stanford, I think one of the most meaningful things that I would like to align myself with is education, which is why it was a crazy big deal when I had the opportunity to meet Sal Khan, who, in my opinion, if you're a South Asian male who cares about education, has got to be the godfather, right? Like there's no one that really kind of trumps him. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What do I really do with education? Like, it's easier to say you care about education. A lot of students care about education, given that that's the only thing I've actually had access to. That is where I think generative AI comes into the question. We've seen technologies like ChatGPT, the ability to create like entire essays within seconds. But what I think all of this technology gives us the ability to do is pursue project-based learning. I think the barrier of entry to creation has been the lowest in the entire lifespan. Because with technologies like ChatGPT, or if you think about the English language, you can now use the English language to create videos, to create text, to create animations, to create images, to create art, to create data sets. You can use English to do so many things. And that modality of creativity and jumping from different places has never been available to us. So if you actually want to teach someone something, and you believe that the best way to teach someone something is by actually creating and by doing, then I think generative AI has the potential to do so much for the world of education. And that brings me to a few weeks ago when Stanford just hosted the AI and Education Summit, where they brought in the leading researchers across Stanford from the CS department, the Graduate School of Education, engineers, teachers, people from my educational neuroscience lab, Sal Khan, and other stakeholders in the system to talk about what does generative AI or technologies like ChatGPT mean for the world of education. And I think it was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. Now, this was an invite-only event, so I had no clue how I was going to get in, but I managed to figure out that there was a mixer where the executive director of the Stanford Learning Accelerator, which was hosting the AI and Education Summit, was standing. So I went to the little mixer, I met her, I requested her, and next thing you know, I managed to get into the event with my roommate. Here's a really interesting example of one of the questions that someone asked to a professor in the CS department. They asked that with ChatGPT, you're basically creating this text, right? You're generating text. And they asked that, well, in that case, is it possible that artificial intelligence is replacing our thinking? Because if you think about it, writing is a very critical way to express your thoughts. When you actually write something, you're putting your thoughts on a piece of paper. If someone says, hey, like reflect on this topic, we say journal on it, because when you're journaling, you're actually putting your ideas out there. So if you have this tool that can generate the text for you based on this tiny prompt, is it in a way putting a bounds on the way you're thinking? And I personally think that there's a lot of potential for this, but here was the CS professor's response, which is also interesting.
So I'm really interested in what you said about like the thinking, because I don't actually think that's the case that these models will sort of do the thinking for the students. In fact, I think that what they do is they raise the bar. So you have something pretty crappy, not crappy in the sense of like bad, but usually generic. Sometimes the argument is coherent on the surface, but not in the very deep level. And what students will get to do is actually learn to edit through editing and through thinking about why it might be not perfect to do the harder work. I think as I suffer from writer's anxiety all the time, getting from like a blank paper to something, and maybe ChatGPT or these other models could get you that anxiety away, and then give room for more learning.
Joke.
Hey guys,
You have anything to say?
feeling grateful, very grateful, a little bit excited, a little bit nervous.
I'm so nervous. We shook his hand.
I was like, hi, I'm Joe, big fan. And I was like, I should not have said that. Dude, he's the guy who I've listened to growing up. You know what I mean?
No, same. I was like,
That guy's voice,
yeah. I
teaching
wanna
me
call-
methods,
Dude,
maths.
yeah.
Wait, straight to the
I
guy.
asked him if he's still a content creator, and he's like, as long as AI doesn't replace me. And I was like, damn, bro. Imagine replacing Sal Khan.
Salkhan has a beard now, dude.
Oh yeah, he does. I like it. Actually, I don't know. You guys can decide. What look do you like?
He's also a bit shorter in person, not gonna lie. He's a little bit shorter.
Oh yeah, he's a little shorter. Just a little shorter.
I hope you guys came up with great ideas for
Sal, Chris, come on out. I'm not sure I really need to introduce Sal Khan. How many people have not heard of Khan Academy? All right, so I think I won't say anything more. And how many people have not heard of Peach Academy? Oh, I meant Code in Place. So why don't we start with something good and happy and promising and all that. Like, how is the future going to be better than the present and the past? And will AI have a role in that?
I like that you talked about creation, because I had that moment too, right? And actually for me, I'll speak to Dolly, right? Or Mid-Journey. I had this moment of I was creating artwork and I lost a whole day. It was like a Saturday. I was like, oh my God, I go find my wife. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and she didn't understand it as much. But I'd show my wife, I'm like, look what I made. She's like, that's nice, honey. And I felt so much better. And maybe just building on your point, it's interesting that we both talk about this because they're both examples of you could do something you couldn't do before. And if you imagine yourself being a 6-year-old, that thing that I could do something and create in ways I couldn't possibly imagine, that's so motivating. And I do think about myself as a computer science teacher. I love teaching computer science. It's like the most fun thing I could possibly imagine doing. And why? Because my students can make stuff. I think the future is going to have kids making things in ways we can't even imagine. Making things that not only do we not imagine a 6-year-old could make, but maybe we didn't even imagine was possible to make. That sounds like a joyful vision of where optimistically we could go. I think there's the biggest issue of ChatGPT that we haven't talked about is the motivation issues it's causing for our students. Imagine yourself being a 15-year-old, and now you have to guess what's worth learning, what's not. And all these skills are getting automated, and worse, ChatGPT is 3. By the time you enter the workforce, it's going to be ChatGPT 10, and it can do all the high-level things that we currently think that is in our domain. That motivation challenge is terrifying. Not for the people in this room. We all have jobs, or we're in wonderful positions. But if you don't have a job, you don't have a wonderful position. If you're one of the millions and millions of students around, billions of students around the world, this could be very hard on motivation.
That's right. I mean, you're teaching programming.
Yeah.
And generative AI is even better at programming than it is at writing English sentences, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
So that seems like a pretty interesting concern. How do you tell somebody it's useful to learn to write their own program when they can ask and get it automatically written for them?
I had a student in my office hours in tears. They're like, this is at Stanford, this is not in Code in Place. They're like, I've just learned how to program and now this skill doesn't feel useful. And that is an emotion that many people are grappling with. Now, I said all these wonderful things. I said, okay, and actually this is in conversation with one of my wonderful colleagues, Cynthia Lee. She says, programmers have always lived on top of abstraction. This is just now a more powerful abstraction. We can do more beautiful, wonderful things with the skill of programming. I said that. I mostly believed it. I also said something like, every programmer has created more programming jobs. So as we train more programmers, it's not like the jobs ran out. We just created more positions, and now that we can be more efficient, we'll create more. And I also mostly believe that. But I do think after pandemic, our students were already going through a mental health crisis. I think now that they've lost some sense of motivation, this is one of the really interesting questions that I would encourage us all to think about that hasn't been raised. Maybe because there's hard answers, or there aren't really obvious answers.
Thoughts on that?
I tend to be on the abstraction crowd. If you looked at a programmer in the 1960s who was writing in machine code or assembly, and they saw what were on punch cards, and they saw the pre-generative AI tools that we have access to, they're like, that's cheating. You're getting away. You're not a real programmer if you're not literally punching ones and zeros into cards. So I think there's always going to be that, and I think the reality is, it just goes back to the writing, is that we're all just going to be able to do more ambitious things. And there's no shortage of ambitious things, and I think the next, I remember when I was coming out of college in the late 90s, it felt like I missed the heyday of computing. Like, only if I had come out in the late 70s or 80s, I could have started Apple or Microsoft or whatever else. But the late 90s was a pretty good time to be a new computer science graduate. And actually, the fear then was outsourcing. I remember I was working in Silicon Valley here in 2000, 2001, and everyone's like, well, these jobs are going to go to India, Sal. I had relatives. These jobs are going to go to India. You should do something else. Go to business school. I thought I did that. But
how'd that turn out?
Well, 10 years later, the computer science was making more than the business school students. And so I think there's that skill set of being able to put these abstractions together, architect them at a higher and higher level of abstraction, actually only accreted more value to that skill set. And I think we're at a cusp where it's just going to be that, what you can do with computing is just going into domains that even last year would have seemed like science fiction. I think it's still going away. I'm more worried about the people who don't have that mindset. If you're a copywriter, if you're a grant writer, if you are one of the people who write kind of these fairly generic news stories on websites or blogs, that I worry more about. But I'm not worried about people who can have the mindset of how do you put the pieces in place to make something pretty cool.
So I think we do have to imagine, somebody having this reaction. Why am I learning this if an automated system can do it already?
And from then on out, it was speaker after speaker talking about some of the most interesting insights I've ever heard about this entire field and where it's going. At the end of the day, it just made for a point in time where I realized how I want to spend my life at Stanford. I love classes. I love my education. But I've become increasingly cognizant of the fact that the true value I derive from this place is when I'm building things and when I'm meeting interesting individuals to talk about inspiring ideas that bring together all of my classes but can't necessarily be captured in any one of my individual classrooms. I think that for me, the right way to do Stanford is by engaging in these side quests and these tangents and these projects and these stories that you'll remember for years to come and won't necessarily translate to a letter on your GPA or a number that you can show potential employers in the future. I want to be a founder. I would love to start a company, and I want to use all my time here to soak in all of the beautiful insights that come from the minds at this school and beyond this school. And if you're watching this, I just want this to be a window into this world for you. So, if you're ever interested in the world of education, if you ever want to have a conversation, if you have something to say, drop it down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know a lot of my videos have been fun and random captures through my day, but I want to be a little more intentional with this. And I know that sometimes that means sitting in front of the camera and just talking about what I care about, and there's not going to be too much dynamism, and there's not going to be too many other characters, and it's just going to be me, and it's just going to be what I think is really interesting. But I also want this channel to be a representation of what I love. And hopefully, in showing you how much I care for this thing, I can encourage you just a little bit to go and find that one thing for you. So, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this mini story about education, and I'll see you next week. Bye. Pew, pew, pew.